What's up, guys? So things are going to be a little back to normal right now. I've got my camera angle fixed, I think. I've got to get the light set back up because the overhead's just not doing it for me. And then as you can probably hear, I've gotten my mic set back up. So slowly but surely we're getting into the proper recording setup. So hey, we're doing pretty good, I think. So last week we discussed the 8BitDo microcontroller. I'll put a card up right here for it. And the trend of controllers is going to continue this week. And the controller we're going to talk about today is for a console that I haven't spent a lot of time with, but one that I would love to play more and get a better understanding of why people enjoyed it so much. And that console is the Sega Dreamcast. I was a Nintendo kid. My dad played the NES and the N64. I didn't even know Sega as a console company until after the Dreamcast here had already been discontinued. And the funny thing is, the one thing that I can look back on and say, oh yeah, that was a Dreamcast I was playing. I remember once as a kid, we went to Indiana and my cousins had a Dreamcast. I didn't know it was a Dreamcast at the time. I just knew, hey, video games. Looking back on it, the only reason I know it was a Dreamcast in the first place was actually because of the reason I'm making this video. So the Dreamcast itself is a very interesting console, but one of the things that makes me struggle to go and play it today is this guy. I'm not sure what it is about it. Maybe it's just that mine here is so old and worn out, but the Dreamcast controller is just not ideal for somebody like me. I'm used to Nintendo controllers. Nintendo controllers have always, with an asterisk, been good. And the Dreamcast controller, it is a solid controller. It's just, it doesn't feel right in my hand. Maybe it's the hard plastic D-pad. I don't really know. I just know something about it just is off. I brought up the 8BitDo controller because 8BitDo is a company that you hear about when you look at console controllers. But then another company that I've only recently started really hearing about is a company called RetroFighters. They put out a few different styles of controllers, from the N64, the GameCube, the PlayStation. Recently they released an Xbox model. The Xbox is the most recent one, and the previous one that they released was this guy, the RetroFighters Wireless Striker DC. This controller is kind of a big deal because it takes this monstrosity here, and not only does it give this guy a more modern form factor, but it also takes it another step into the more modern generation by getting rid of this wire. Now don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of retro games. The wired controller is technically part of the experience, but there's something nice about being able to plug in a Bluetooth adapter or some kind of wireless receiver dongle to allow you to sit further away from your screen to play your games, especially in the modern day when we have such giant screens that we're trying to play these games on. You know, the biggest screen that these were originally designed for was like 27 inches. Now we have massive 50, 60, 70 inch screens that we want to play these games on, but we can't get far enough away to actually properly enjoy it. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to take this over to the table. I'm going to unbox it for you, show what comes in here, talk a bit about the controller and the receiver itself, and then we're going to plug it into the Dreamcast and really get an idea of how it feels in play. So yeah, let's go do it. Alrighty, let's do it. This is the Striker DC. As you can see from the box, it's just kind of the controller itself. It gives you a little bit of blurbs about the controller. But one important thing to note, because I know that some people in the comments are going to ask, the second bullet right there, it does have Hall effect sticks in it, which is a good thing. But outside of that, the box itself is fairly standard. So we're just gonna crack this guy open and get right to the meat and potatoes of it all. So inside this box is not just another box, but two more boxes. And that's it for this guy. So he can go over here, he can go out to the side. We've got the box with the controller in it and the box with the VMU reader in it. We'll do the controller in a minute. I want to talk a minute about this guy. And at the top of the box, you're gonna have your USB-C charging cable. This does have a rechargeable battery in it, and it does use USB-C to charge it. Underneath that, you have the what they call it. I guess they did call it that. Hold one moment. I just wanted to go get a VMU so I can show you this. But the VMU dock itself does have a little window so you can see, so when the VMU is locked inside it, you can see the screen much like you can with a standard Dreamcast controller. It does only have room in here for one though. So effectively this controller here only has one memory card slot, whereas a standard Dreamcast controller, had two slots. It does have a button here on the bottom of it, but that's just for syncing the controller to it. And on the bottom of it is a USB-C port. Luckily, this guy does not require charging. It pulls power from the console. That is for updating the firmware on the dock. And then we get into the controller itself. And that guy is right here. Immediately, this controller feels, to me, a lot better than the standard Dreamcast controller. If anything, just because of the flare to the grips seems to be in a different direction. As you can see here with this guy, the controller is wider at the top and it kind of narrows back towards you, making it so that if you really want to get a good grip on the controller, you have to almost like tilt your wrists in. It's not like it's unplayable. It's not like it's bad. It's just, it's very different than anything we're used to nowadays. Whenever you have something like a Switch Pro controller, which also flares out, or a DualSense controller, which also flares out, the design of the Striker DC here is going to be much more familiar to what we're used to because of that outward flare. Our hands can just tilt towards the screen and your wrists are not going to get uncomfortable like they would whenever you're holding on to the original controller. Now, I'm sure that this is just an effect of the Hall Effect sticks themselves, but the stick feels a lot looser than other controllers. Like, it doesn't feel like it's like wiggly loose. It just feels like you don't have to put as much tension down in order to move the stick about. Now, that could be viewed as a good thing, that could be viewed as a bad thing depending on what you're used to. I do personally prefer my sticks to be a little bit stiffer. If any of y'all know, is there a way to modify or adjust the stiffness of Hall Effect sticks? If you do know, and there is actually a way to do that, let me know. I'd love to hear. I'd love to be able to do that. Honestly, aside from the shape of the controller, the biggest difference is going to be in the stick and the D-pad. The stick itself of the Dreamcast controller, it's a very rounded design, and it's very glossy plastic with those dimples on it to give your thumb something to grab onto. The Striker DC controller, however, the stick itself is the rubberized head like we're used to, and it's got a much more modern, almost like PlayStation-esque thumbstick to it, where the outer ring of the head has some texture to it, and the inner bit, while still rubberized, is a bit smoother to allow your thumb to kind of slide on it and find that edge to be able to move it exactly where you want it to go. And then the D-pad itself, this is a very Sega D-pad. While not a circular design like it was on the Saturn, you can tell it still feels very rounded underneath, so that way you can really get those like quarter circle movements for fighting games. Whereas this guy feels a lot more like a normal D-pad. You still have the ability for those quarter circle movements, but the transition to actually do like quarter or half circle movements is nowhere near as smooth as it is on the OEM controller. With this, you could really just hit and rock in a direction and it just rolls right into it. Whereas with this one, you do almost have to intentionally hit each button. So the battery on this guy is dead, so I'm gonna go ahead and use the charger here, the charging cable here that they gave me to get some juice in it, so I can actually use it for some gameplay to show you guys that. The face buttons themselves do feel really good. They feel very similar to the OEM buttons here, although these do feel a bit like stiffer, but that might just be because this is a fresh membrane underneath these, whereas this is, a 20-year-old membrane. Either way, they do feel really good. The other big difference between these two controllers is actually the shoulder buttons. As you can see, the Dreamcast here has two very analog triggers, and the Striker DC here has two triggers and two buttons. So the Dreamcast controller did have analog triggers, and it had this range of motion here for something like Crazy Taxi. Whenever you're driving, one of these triggers was your gas, so you had a level of control over how fast you were going to go. With this guy, you do still have that level of control because it does give you an analog trigger, which I do wish had a bit more pressure needed to press it down, but then it does just give you a shoulder button in order to press it down. Now, what this does is this gives you your analog range, but this also gives as if you just full sent it to the bottom. So the trigger gives you your analog range, but then this button is basically the same as just pressing it all the way to the bottom immediately and then holding it there and praying. I feel like I noticed this. I didn't actually record anything to test it, but it felt like this all the way down and this all the way down were not the same. It's almost like there was a step further that this should have been able to go that they gave to the button itself. It's like, like with this guy, you have your range from 0 to 100. This guy feels like it took your range from 0 to 95, and then this was your 100. I might just be going crazy, but it just felt like my acceleration was slower in Crazy Taxi using this controller than it was in this controller whenever I use the trigger here. Again, I might just be going crazy, but that's what it felt like to me. It does have a turbo function. You have your turbo button here, but I personally don't ever use turbo whenever I'm playing games. So I honestly never thought to test it out. So your mileage may vary on if that's actually a good function or not. If it is, cool. If not, oh well, you still have a good controller otherwise. I don't really personally feel like you should be buying a controller because it has turbo. You should be buying a controller for a bunch of other reasons. And then if it has turbo, then cool. The build itself is really solid. There's not an ounce of flex in it whenever I try and wrench it a little bit. And the plastic doesn't really have any give whenever you squeeze on it. I wouldn't call it quite up to the 8-bit do standard, and that might just be due to the actual plastic that it is. It's still a really solid build, and I'm really not concerned about the longevity of this guy. And well, it wouldn't be a controller review video without a sound test, so I'm gonna show you how my Dreamcast controller sounds, and then I'll do the sounds of the Striker DC. One important thing to talk about with the Striker DC is actually relevant to the VMU itself. Like I said before, you know, the original Dreamcast controller had 2 VMU ports, so you could have like the actual VMU in the top one to be able to see it, and then an extra memory card in the back. And this guy only has the 1 slot for the VMU itself. The big problem comes whenever you actually have a game that uses the screen of the VMU for gameplay. There are very few games that actually do this. I remember being curious and looking it up a few months back, and there's only like 2 or 3 that actually required the VMU to be in your visual while you played the game. Some relevant information would show up on the screen here, and you needed that to play the game. So that is an issue with this guy. You're gonna drop this into the little docky thing here, plug this into your Dreamcast, and then walk away. So it's gonna be right next to the console while you're taking this controller somewhere else to play your game. Now, given how few games in the Dreamcast library actually use this feature, I don't see it as a big issue. If you're gonna be playing those more niche games that require it, then I would about guarantee you have one of these lying around that you can just, for this one game, sit up next to the TV with this controller to play that game. It's hard for me to complain about this guy basically losing that feature when so few games actually use it as a feature. But it is important to note that because of this, those games are not going to really be playable with the Striker DC. What's up, guys? Me here in editing. I forgot to mention this while recording, but there is actually a wired version of this controller. It oddly is a little more expensive. I don't know why, but a link for that's down below as well. All right, so I have the Dreamcast set up with the VMU dock plugged into the first controller port. We're going to turn this on. I don't have a game in there yet, but we'll just turn this on. Dreamcast. And so as you can see, it does work. It does read our VMU. And we're gonna put this in a game. I want to show you what I was talking about the trigger with Crazy Taxi. So I do apologize for the lack of music in this clip, but Crazy Taxi had a lot of licensed music in it, and I just can't do that. I don't really actually need to play. I just want to show you what I was talking about. So you tell me, does that seem like full speed? And does this seem like full acceleration? So how do I brake? That's how you brake, okay. So, and then there's full acceleration. What do you guys think? Does that trigger seem to be slower than the Dreamcast one whenever you full send it? I don't know. So I wanted to put in Soul Calibur to kind of give you guys an idea as to what the input lag might be like, even though I don't really think there is any, but just to give you guys an idea. So yeah, this guy kind of rules. The stick to me does feel a little bit loose, and I'm not sure how I feel about the dual trigger setup on it, but you know, it does work. It works really well, and I really like being able to. I like the fact that I can sit wherever I want to play my Dreamcast games now, and this might actually make getting into Dreamcast games just a little bit easier. Anyways, I like this guy. If you want to purchase one, they go for about 50 bucks on Amazon, and I'll leave an affiliate link down in the description below so you can go get one for yourself. But that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys for being here, and I look forward to bringing you guys even more controller talks just like this one as the days go on. So again, thank you guys for being here, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one, y'all.